And now I'm happy to introduce Emily Obenauer. Emily, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. Really appreciate the warm introduction there. And thanks to all you for attending today. Really excited to share some fascinating results from some recent research that we facilitated with Utility Dive. So today we're going to be talking about, as Cynthia set up for us here, this topic of uncovering the digital divide and really diving into key priorities, key challenges from a utility executive's perspective, especially around digital infrastructure. So, like Cynthia said, my name is Emily Obenauer. I'm the Global Director of Product Marketing for Sitetracker, and I'm excited to be speaking with you guys today. A little bit more on Sitetracker in a second, but first, let's dive a little bit more into what we're going to be talking about today. So today we're going to talk about the research that was conducted, right? So I'll share a little bit more about what our objectives were, really what we felt the importance of this research was, audience demographics, of course, to give you guys a better sense of who exactly we spoke with. We'll talk a little bit about some of the assumptions we had going into this research and what we expected to find from it based on the role of digital infrastructure in modern utilities. We'll also then, of course, give you direct from the mouths of these, folks who participated in the research. We'll give you their thoughts on strategic priorities within the utility ecosystem in the next number of years, as well as challenges that they are facing related to some of those priorities. Lastly, would love to have a conversation around digital transformation and ultimately business process transformation. Again, highly tied to this research, and you'll see again straight from the mouths of those who were researched the importance of business process transformation, and then ending with some stories from the field. So that's the goal for today. That's what we'll be getting through in the next 5 minutes to about an hour. But quickly before we dive in, just to set the context of who am I, where am I coming from, why am I talking about this today? So I'm from Sitetracker, and Sitetracker, we provide one complete platform to manage the end-to-end asset lifecycle. And what that means is we really help to manage all critical activity across that end-to-end lifecycle, from early planning and development work all the way through ongoing asset management and operations and maintenance, all within one centralized platform. We are a team of about 400 employees across the globe. We have about 350 or so customers. We're growing at a fairly rapid rate. We have fantastic customer retention and even, I'd say, better expansion in terms of those customers who are working with us, continuing to expand the way they work with us, and a little less than 100,000 active users on the platform at any one given time. And then in terms of who we work with, right? So this survey was, of course, specific to the utility space, and we have a large footprint within that space here within the States, but also globally. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen, kind of a very select, I would say, small number of logos here that represent the types of companies we work with. But the utilities up there noted at the top. And then we also have a heavy presence across the full kind of energy ecosystem, from EV charging companies to, renewables, developers, EPCs and beyond, and then contractors serving within those spaces as well. We also work heavily on the digital infrastructure side of critical infrastructure, including those that work across fiber, tower operators and owners, mobile network operators, and again, contractors that also work within those spaces. So happy to speak with you guys about this today and talk a little bit more about the research we conducted. So let's talk about that. Let's kick things off with a bit of discussion on what we did. So the purpose of the research that we conducted was ultimately to understand top priorities for utilities in the next 3 to 5 years and the perceived challenges they have in executing against those priorities. I think we recognize that every department within a utility is working on something that could be considered mission critical at this stage in the game, as we think about modernizing the grid, as we think about transitioning toward clean energy. And because everyone has a mission critical project, how are executives really thinking about the top priorities amongst all of that? So in terms of who we spoke to then, so ultimately we spoke to 150 representatives across the US. So a really good smattering of individuals. About 1/3 of those 150 professionals worked for investor-owned utilities or municipalities. Almost 20% came from some kind of utility subsidiary, good to note. In terms of the size, a little less than half, so just over 40%, were serving populations between 1 and 5 million customers, and specific to electric utilities. So again, between that 1 and 5. And it's also good to note that for many of the organizations that we surveyed, they have operations in more than one region. In terms of role or responsibility, I mentioned this earlier, leadership or executives. So we were really able to capture a very, top to mid down view of where these priorities lie because of who we were able to speak to. So about 80%, maybe just slightly over, in fact, of the people that we talked to, of those 150 representatives, included executive team members, directors, or minimally senior managers. So still those who are, having more influence within strategic decision making, either in the way their teams operate or in what the priorities need to be for their team. And it's also good to note that most of these 150 had responsibilities across more than one functional area. About half mentioned they had responsibility within operations itself, but many were also crossing slightly up, different functions, which not surprising when we're starting to get into that leadership category. So as we went into this research, we had some assumptions at Sitetracker, right? We thought we knew what we might hear from folks, but of course, like any good piece of research, you go into it having a goal, having maybe some assumptions on what you're going to hear, but then crafting it in such a way that, of course, is incredibly unbiased and allows the voice of those surveyed to really come through and either validate your perspective or steer you in a different direction. Now, going into this survey, we expected to hear about how digital infrastructure, things like fiber, private networks, really the foundation of the grid of the future, is becoming more and more of a priority within the utility space, and really better understanding what kinds of challenges they were having specific to those types of projects. Again, that was really our assumption going into this. And of course, so when we think about the grid of yesterday, the grid of tomorrow, we recognized that as there are all of these massive projects happening within the utility ecosystem, they're incredibly interconnected and interdependent on one another. And moving toward that grid of tomorrow is heavily reliant on having a solid communication foundation to support all of these distributed assets and working the way we need them to, and having that granular level of understanding on what's happening, what's been deployed, what's a project status at, et cetera, to be able to get us to a place where we can fully transition to a clean energy future. So our assumption was that we were going to be seeing that coming through. That's when we did the research to find out if that was in fact the case. So let's look at the research and the results from the actual mouths of these 150 utility executives or leaders. So one of the questions we asked, strategic priorities for utilities. Which of the following initiatives are the highest priorities for your organization in the next 3 to 5 years? These were not surprising to see. We saw things like renewable energy growth. Absolutely. Of course, we're going to be seeing this as we work toward the clean energy transition, especially more distributed, less centralized. As we think about growing the works of growing climate change, and as we see more disruption in our system and more, of course, work being done on the aging grid infrastructure itself, we're needing more and more reliability enhancements to ensure that people across all geographies are getting reliable power. Automation enhancements, carbon emissions reductions, revenue growth, of course, things that are priorities over the next 3 to 5 years. But this is ultimately what we saw. Now, the next question we asked to really back this up, or kind of as our next step, was when you think about how you might support those top initiatives, which of the following infrastructure projects are considered the highest priority in your organization to support them? So again, when we think about something like renewable energy growth, what is going to enable you to grow renewable energy within your portfolio as a utility? What do you need to be able to get there? Now, the top answer, with almost 50% of respondents noting that this was a top important initiative for them, was cybersecurity and IoT connectivity, ultimately relating back to, right, like field asset connectivity at such a granular level to understand where assets are at. The next one, highly related, the field connectivity infrastructure deployments and upgrades, fiber, private networks, et cetera. This was absolutely, again, when you think back to the assumptions that we had made going into this research, this is what we expected to see. This is what we anticipated to see. And this is backed up through, of course, the investment we're actually seeing, the dollars that are being spent. I think the latest predictions in market have been that by the end of 2026, it's anticipated that $2 billion will have been spent within the US at utilities specific to infrastructure that supports the connectivity of field assets, like again, whether it's a wireline like fiber or wireless through private networks and more. We know that there's a massive amount of money being spent in the space. And of course, it was backed up saying that we cannot achieve our strategic objectives without investing in this layer of infrastructure. So it was really fantastic to see that that was validated through the research that we did. In terms of then asking our participants why they were embracing field connectivity, why did that matter ultimately to achieving these? Ultimately, when you look at the top 5 priorities, maybe the top 4, I would say, it ultimately came down to the ability to have a granular level view of data to support these initiatives moving forward. Whether you're talking about having a more mature grid infrastructure that allows for better automation and enhancements over time to streamline operations, whether you're talking about kind of managing the variability and needs within the renewable energy space, whether you're talking about needing a granular level of detail necessary to enhance the reliability of power within certain populations or communities where work is being done, or whether you're using it as a way to understand what's the next path or what's the next step in our path toward reducing carbon emissions. Ultimately, it was around granular levels of data and being able to understand, again, how assets are operating at any one given time. Now, from a revenue growth one, maybe the one that's slightly different in my mind, certainly, as utilities are looking to diversify and find new streams of revenue, being able to understand where assets are, where they're at in the kind of asset life cycle from being initially developed through the ongoing asset management of these pieces. It's allowing, again, that granular level of detail. It's allowing them to unlock some of these new business lines like EV charging, for example. I think the other thing that's really important to call out on this slide, guys, is the right-hand column around cross-departmental urgency. Now, I think what was important to note is when we were surveying and asking, what are your priorities? What are important initiatives to achieve these priorities? And why does that matter? We then asked even further and said, do you believe that across departments, people understand why things like field asset connectivity are so urgent today? We wanted to understand what the perception was on the level of priority across different departments. And what you can see here is that really cross-departmentally, people understand, departments understand, leaders understand the importance of investing in this work. From executive leadership, 95% of our respondents, their executive leadership either somewhat to very strongly understood the importance of this work happening and happening now, down to, I think, the lowest, still close to 90 at 89% finance also being on board and recognizing the investment that's necessary to be made to mitigate any kind of risk and look at the future and where we're headed as a utility, as an organization. So let's dive into the challenges that we saw with this. So again, we went through saying, what are your priorities? How do we support, or how are you planning to achieve those priorities? Why are you looking to achieve those, and who kind of within the organization understands the importance of doing this? And now we wanted to talk about challenges, right? Because we recognize that these are not simple projects. Quite frankly, right, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, nothing within the utility ecosystem could probably be considered a simple project. It's all complex. It's all highly interconnected and related to one another and dependent on different teams and different projects that are happening around it. So we really wanted to understand what are some of the specific challenges being faced when it comes to either deploying or upgrading field asset connectivity kind of infrastructure, so fiber, private networks, et cetera. Here's what we heard. First and foremost, at the top line question, 75% of respondents said they were either reporting some barriers up to heavy barriers, heavy challenges that they were facing when it came to deploying out this infrastructure. In terms of some of the top things we heard very consistently, over a third of respondents shared that insufficient staffing is one of their top challenges. This is no surprise to us. Of course, all of us collectively are seeing in the market that trained staffing is hard to come by right now, as we have an aging and retiring workforce, as we're trying to replace that, and especially those that are working more technically out in the field. That has been a very big gap in terms of getting the right people in. Related to that, the second one, of course, at 23% noted, was specifically the lack of in-house technical or engineering experience. So not just that we lack staffing overall, but the technical and engineering expertise is absolutely a pain point for many of these respondents to deal with. And lastly, again, I'd say really staying in the same vein here, you guys, I'm sure unsurprising to many of you, managing contractors, right? So it's kind of it builds on each other, right? And starting at insufficient staffing to really the technical expertise, and ultimately where that leads a lot of utilities is having to then rely on outside third parties to come in and support some of the more technical aspects of either planning or actually getting constructed. Maybe it's the management long-term, or it's the operations and maintenance piece, but having to rely on contractors for these different facets of the life cycle to manage the work. Now, in terms of how we think about that, like kind of having a spotlight on each of these, I really reviewed the first two, I'd say, in a bit more detail. So, the insufficient staffing again, knowing that across the utilities that we surveyed, and particularly, of course, smaller utilities that we might have spoken with, staffing shortages just continue to be a massive issue for them. And they're having to then look to either outside parties, or it really puts, a compounded issue when they start to look for skilled labor in particular. So really having, a lot of them were talking about the need for tools to centralize and standardize work to create efficiencies, as well as create very clear ways of operating against some of these projects. Again, very similar to what we're seeing when it comes to the technical aspect, or technical expertise aspect, I should say, on this. Now, when it came to the contractor management, again, as you think about what's happening in the labor market and having smaller pool to rely on or to recruit into, more and more organizations, more and more utilities are having to then pull from outside contractor pools to use when executing against some of this work. And again, similar to even managing in-house teams, some of which who are more experienced, some of which who might be new to an organization and really just be out of their apprenticeship and training. With a contractor pool, you're similarly having issues with managing them in a centralized place, keeping them highly connected to the work that's being done with an administrative back office team, and doing it in a very standardized fashion that breeds efficiency. These were some of the things that were really talked about by the respondents, both through the surveying, the kind of quantitative, if you will, or closed end, but then also as they really qualified their answers and gave a bit more explanation as to what those challenges really looked like. Okay, so I want to transition us into a conversation about transforming business operations, digital transformation, but again, ultimately business operations transformation. I think it goes without saying, right? All of us are either seeing this through our lived experience in the day-to-day work that we're doing. We're also all seeing it through the headlines that we're seeing come through the news every day, or through our Google alerts. Critical infrastructure is booming. So whether you're talking about EV charging infrastructure, whether you're talking about the deployment of digital infrastructure like private networks, whether you're talking about renewable generation and getting that infrastructure out and live so that we can take advantage of it, there is massive investment happening in critical infrastructure. In fact, the expectation is that by the end of this calendar year, so 5 or 6 weeks, globally, there will have been $3 trillion spent on critical infrastructure globally. Again, we recognize that this is a growing space because of the aging infrastructure we have, and not just that, but because of the transition that we're undergoing toward a clean energy future and a more connected future. So really, what that leads us to ask is this question of, utilities as a key member of this problem, but also as a key enabler to help us succeed through this. Do utilities have the tools necessary to remove bottlenecks, streamline operations, and ultimately accelerate the progress against the projects that are going to help us move forward? Again, as noted by the executives in this report, really that foundational underlying digital infrastructure layer, the fiber, the private networks, and more, that layer really being a priority. do we have the tools necessary to be able to accelerate progress against that layer of work? So when you think about that question, one of the answers that we have continued to come back to, and that many kind of consultants in different spaces have come back to, is digital transformation. And digital transformation, I again more specifically mean business operations transformation, really looking at the ways in which we're doing business. And whether you're looking at someone like a PricewaterhouseCooper, which is noted on here, or an Accenture or a Wood Mackenzie, or any of the big consulting firms or research bodies, what you continue to see time and time again, as I'm sure again all of you have seen, is that CEOs or executives are continually looking at digital transformation, business process transformation, as the way to fundamentally change how businesses operate and compete. And I would say an asterisk on that is it is very well documented in these types of research that it's especially within complex business environments. So of course, this applies directly to the work that's being done in the utility ecosystem. As you think about, again, we mentioned at the top of this, everything being highly interconnected and related to one another. Each department within a utility ultimately owning something that comes off as really mission critical to how we're moving forward. Business transformation, really helping to change the way that we operate and compete. So thinking about that digital transformation as a path forward, we asked the utility leaders in this survey to talk with us a little bit more about where they think some help could come from. What's going to help them overcome the barriers that they mentioned, right? How are they going to be able to move forward in the face of the adversity that they're confronted with? So 4 of the top things that stood out. One, with nearly 50% of respondents mentioning this, centralized project management software. Ultimately, we had, again, almost 50% saying that I need a place to really centralize the work that I'm doing because of many things. One, I don't have enough connection between project teams that are, doing the work. I don't have enough visibility into just project status. Where is something at? Where is that at in terms of getting up and live? I don't understand that today, and it's holding me back from making critical decisions about this project, but also those highly related and interdependent projects. We also heard from about 40% of respondents, they simply need better handoff between project teams. I mentioned at the top of this that Sitetracker, we work across that end-to-end asset life cycle from the initial planning and development work all the way through ongoing asset management. And creating an environment where there's more simplified handoff because everything is so centralized in nature creates a lot of efficiency in terms of the handoff between teams and what's being done. 36% mentioned mobile tools for connecting the field to the back office. Unsurprising to us, at least. We see this, of course, through a lot of the research we do across various industries supporting critical infrastructure deployment and management, but definitely was heard loud and clear in this particular study with 150 utility executives. They need better mobile tools for those folks who are out in the field to not only get the job done and get it done correctly the first time, but also to ensure that we're connecting the field to the back office in real time so that we can understand and all be working off of the same information all at once. Also considering mobile tools from a worker safety standpoint. What are we doing to ensure that those who are out in the field are safe and doing their job the way it should be done and able to get home at the end of the night? 34% then mentioned streamlined workflows. And I think this is, incredibly straightforward, but ultimately making sure that we understand what does it take to get a project done and streamlining that process, ensuring that we're getting from A to Z in the quickest fashion to ensure that it's efficient and ultimately then repeatable. So want to loop back full circle then to Sitetracker and what we're doing today. So excuse me for a moment while I tell you a bit more about us. Ultimately, Sitetracker today is working with utilities and others across critical infrastructure to centralize project and asset data, to standardize processes, and ultimately to optimize resources. We're transforming the chaotic kind of old historic business as usual ways of doing business and that mentality. We're taking all of that, putting it through the Sitetracker machine, if you will, and ultimately coming out with a more streamlined and optimal way of doing business. We're simplifying your tech stack and reducing any project related risk that you might have moving forward. Now, the value that many of our customers are realizing today, and especially related back to what we were seeing in this survey, are things like, again, centralized project oversight. So being able to manage timelines, budget, and resources all really within one platform and having those things very tightly interlinked together and gaining full visibility on where things are at. Automating and reducing manual tasks. I know all of us could stand to be able to reduce some of the administrative burden when it comes to managing an ecosystem of disparate tools by different teams for different projects, different documents, etc. All of the different ways that we typically or traditionally have done business. Real-time budget and status tracking. I hit on this a bit earlier, but really I don't think can be emphasized enough because I know it's something that in this industry we're all dealing with. Being able to understand in real time where a project is at. Where are we at? When is it going to be complete or be moving on to the next stage? And having budget very tightly aligned to that. Enhancing collaboration and communication, really making sure that, again, whether you're at back office or in the field or doing both in different, from day to day, making sure that you have a way to tightly communicate and collaborate with the teams around you to stay in the loop and to be able to, again, get your job done the way it needs to be done the first time. Simplifying technology and vendor decisions. So really making sure that based on the information you have in our system, you're able to identify and select kind of the right partners to work with, as well as collaborating with those partners in the right way and in a standardized, common way that's baked into your processes, not their processes. And then again, those seamless handoffs from one phase to the next. Again, something that we heard really loud and clear from respondents of this survey. So quick story from the field, a bit anonymized, so please excuse. I wanted to share this. So one of the utilities that we work with here in the States, a top 5, I'd say, utility in terms of size here in the States, when we were working with one of their project teams within the IT side of their business, we were able to really go through and map out what their current state looked like specific to one project type. And as you can see, I think all of us can relate to this, right? It's multiple places to house information, multiple document types that might be used, different ways of communicating and collaborating, different individuals who own different pieces of this puzzle and need access to different documents at different times. And it just ultimately creates a world of chaos. We were able to come in and really understand what was happening and where there was opportunity for efficiency. And as you can see with Sitetracker, reduce the amount of chaos that was happening around them, give them a centralized place for things to live, ensure that all of the key project stakeholders had access to this information to make more strategic decisions in the moment as they needed to, reduce the number of documents that were needed to be managed outside or inside at any given time, and ultimately make their lives much more manageable and ultimately their projects much more efficient, much more, profitable, all of those things. So really fantastic, high level overview. I know we'd be happy to share more about some of the other work we do with customers. If you're ever interested, don't hesitate to reach out. I would just say, kind of landing on here again, like I mentioned at the onset, we do a lot of work with various utilities, not just within the US, but globally and across multiple, what we would say, use cases or, project types that you all might be working on. So whether it is really related to digital infrastructure or if it's beyond that from, pole attachments, energy efficiency programs, renewable energy deployment, we do a lot of work within the utility space. So always happy to talk more about that. Now, I would say I did go over much of the research today, but there was a lot that we didn't necessarily have time for today. If you're interested in reading more about the research that we did and want the full report, please reach out to us. I put my email on here. You're welcome to reach out to me. You can also go to our website and request some information, and we'd be happy to pass that along to you as well. But fantastic stuff to thumb through. I don't know about any of you, but I love a good research report. So at this time, I will look and see if we have any questions. Okay, so we have a couple, and I will also go ahead and follow up with questions later. So one of the questions that came in was just about the research itself. Is the research free or what's the cost? It's free. Reach out to us. We're happy to provide you the report at no cost. So great question. Go ahead and reach out to us and we'll give it to you. If there are any other questions, yeah, I'll go ahead and back up, guys. There's the email address if you need that. And again, if you don't reach out to me directly, so one, go ahead and reach out to me directly. You can connect with Sitetracker on LinkedIn. That's a fantastic way to stay up to date on what we're doing or get the most recent either research or content that we're developing out in markets specific to utilities or other industries. So go ahead and check us out on LinkedIn, please. But with that, I'm going to move us forward, guys. I would say too, if you're interested in what we've talked about today and how Sitetracker might be able to support you in creating better business process and create more efficiencies within your business, please reach out to us. We would love to spend some time giving you a demo of what it is we can do for you and telling you a little bit more about what we're doing for some of our other customers in your space. I don't see any other questions coming through, so please continue to submit those for the next minute or two, or reach out to us again later and we're happy to follow up with you later. But thank you all for the time today. I so appreciated it. I hope you all found it beneficial. And like Cynthia said at the onset, a recording of this will be available in the next week or so you can always reference it there later. But thanks again for the time. Cynthia, anything else from you?
No, I don't think so, and I don't see any other questions. So I just want to remind everyone that the presentation slides and recording will be available in networks within a week. And once again, I want to thank our sponsor, Sitetracker, and Emily Obenauer for her very informative presentation. And thank you all for attending. Have a great day. Thanks again, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks all. Have a great day.
Bye. You too. Bye-bye.